What's up, guys, and welcome back to Moaning. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Heya, how you doing? And if you're into the history of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, maybe you're just into the mythology, and maybe you didn't know that we were mourning Patroclus, okay? Change your outfit, wear black if you're not already wearing black, because otherwise it's disrespectful as But regardless of the color clothing that you are wearing, you should be hitting that subscribe button and the bell icon so you know every single time I post in the future. I tend to tell people off anyways, so welcome to the club. Anyways, as you can see from the title of this video, we are going to be talking about book 17 of Homer's Iliad. So if I could summarize book 17 into one sentence, it would be that Patroclus' body is now on the battlefield. Who's gonna get it? That's right, guys. It is officially a tug of war. This entire book is just the two armies fighting over Patroclus' body. Because the Trojans want it, obviously, they want to show off that they have killed Achilles' best friend, and the Greeks want it because, well, they need it for Achilles because they're terrified of Achilles and they want to give the body back to him so that he can properly bury him. Otherwise, Achilles will probably kill all of them. So that's what's happening in this book. So let's just roll into the narrative. So Menelaus is the first guy to really see that Patroclus has fallen on the battlefield, and he immediately goes over to guard the body because he's like, now what? So he goes over to guard the body, but the guy who had stabbed Patroclus in the back comes forward because he wants to take the body back to the Trojans and the armor, because he's like, this is now like my thing, this is the most important thing to me, I need to take this body back, I need the proof that I have killed this man. So he goes over to Menelaus and he basically says, move aside, old dude, this is my time to shine. Menelaus says no, and then he boasts about like killing the guy's brother. He's like, you're not really that tough because I killed your brother like a whole second ago. And then the original guy says to Menelaus, well, now I have to kill you because you killed my brother. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? So he stabs Menelaus's shield, but actually when he stabs the shield, it really didn't do anything. Like literally his, like the tip of his spear ends up like bending back. So the actual spear breaks in the shield, which is useless. So that's what happens. Menelaus is like, haha, and then he ends up stabbing this guy in the gullet, which I think is like this part of the neck, because then when he slices backwards, he ends up slicing the guy's neck open in like the soft spot of his neck, which is like here. So he ends up doing that. The guy obviously falls because nobody can survive that. And then none of the other Trojans want to attack Menelaus because they now think that he's a madman, which they're not wrong. Menelaus then goes down to start taking the guy's armor, but obviously Apollo sees this and he's like, well, somebody's got to do something about this. So he then takes on the guise of this other Trojan and he goes down to stand near Hector. And he tells Hector that Menelaus has killed one of the best of the Trojans, which this is book 17. This is the first time we've met this dude. This is the first time that we've heard he's one of the best Trojans. I'm not even mentioning his name because he's so irrelevant. He just died. And yet Apollo's like, oh no, Menelaus just killed one of the best of the Trojans. And you read it like, did he? Either way, he says this to Hector, and then he just leaves. He tells him, like, oh, this is the thing that's happened, and now Menelaus is standing over the body of Patroclus, and then he just leaves. He seems like he's not really there for a purpose, honestly. Hector, though, is riled up by Apollo's little weird pep talk, and he does start stalking through the ranks towards Menelaus as he's standing over Patroclus. And so he's stalking through, and he gives out these massive, massive war cries. All of the Trojans are, like, responding, and they're all getting riled up, and obviously Menelaus hears this, and he starts bricks, right? He's in the middle, he's by himself, he's completely by himself with a dead body, and he's trying to handle another dead body, so he's just like, now what? In fact, Menelaus has this whole soliloquy where he's trying to figure out whether he should stay and guard Patroclus or whether he should leave, and he kind of wishes that there were other people around him so he didn't have to make this decision. And he hopes that with the decision that he's going to make, because he knows that he has to leave, because there's no way that it can just be like a one-man fight. He's like, that's not going to work. So he hopes that the Greeks aren't going to hate him for leaving Patroclus for like 5 seconds. So he does end up bolting though. He hears Hector stalking through, he hears the screams, and he's just like, all right. And he reluctantly leaves to go and find more men to help him guard Patroclus. Menelaus immediately goes to find Big Ajax, and he does find him on the other side of battle, and he explains to him the whole situation, and is like, Patroclus is dead, the body's over there, and Hector's already stripping the armor, so I need your help to guard the body, because Achilles will hate us otherwise. So Ajax is obviously like, holy crap, this is super important. He ends up walking back with, well, not walking, that would be really inappropriate. They're like sprinting over to this body, right? So they go over to the body, and they can see that Hector's already stripped the armor, and they're actually starting to tug the body away because the Trojans want the body. More importantly, Hector wants the body because Hector wants to chop off Patroclus' head and leave his body for the dogs and the vultures to eat, and then put his head on a spike. They literally tell us that that is what Hector wants to do, and you're like, oh, okay. Ajax moves in to stand over Patroclus' body, and as this is happening, Hector hands off the armor to his friends to drag back to Troy, because obviously he wants to keep the armor. But Ajax is guarding one side of Patroclus' body, and Menelaus is guarding the other to make sure that no like surprise attacks are coming on this body. So Glaucus then goes to find Hector and walks over to him and is just like, wow, you are full of shit. And in fact, Glaucus is now the leader of the Lycians because Sarpedon died in the last book. If you haven't watched that, I highly suggest that you do. But it's okay if you don't, I can't make you do anything. Basically, Sarpedon is dead at this point, so Glaucus took over. And he says to Hector, the way that Hector is so on top of Patroclus's body is the way that he should have been on top of Sarpedon's body. And so he's basically like, I hate you for not treating Sarpedon's body with the same amount of importance that you're treating this body. Which is actually really upsetting to hear Glaucus say that. But he obviously has to go like a couple of steps further. And he says that now Hector is standing back from the body only because he knows that Ajax is the better fighter and Hector would never stand a chance against Ajax. Which, I have to say, I don't know if it's 100% true, but based on what we've seen in this book, because anytime they face off, like they started off as a tie and then Ajax whacked him with a rock, like this whole thing. It doesn't really seem like Hector could beat Ajax, so Glaucus is kind of just based off of what we've seen, sort of saying what we're all thinking. But obviously Hector takes massive, massive offense to this, and he's like, what? And so instead, he then shouts back to his companions who are taking away the armor, Patroclus's armor, and he has to go and catch up with them because he instead wants to switch his armor for Patroclus's to show how powerful he is, which is more so really, really icky and gruesome and gross than powerful, but okay. So he does end up catching up to them. He does change his armor right there and then on the battlefield. Luckily it fits. I always think this, like, wow, what if it didn't fit and he was like squishing into this tiny armor, or if it was like too big and he's like swimming in it. It fits in perfectly, obviously. And so he then puts that on. He then gives his armor to his friends who then take that armor instead back to Troy. And Hector then goes back out into fighting. But Zeus watches this happen. Zeus watches the whole armor situation and he just starts shaking his head and he's like, this poor fool right now, because he knows that because Hector killed Patroclus, Achilles has to come and kill him. And he also doesn't understand why he's sort of milking this. Like, Zeus doesn't understand why Hector is milking this situation, because he's like, isn't just killing Patroclus enough? Like, that's all he had to do. And now he's just taking more and more and more. But despite Zeus being a little frustrated with Hector, he does still infuse him with this great strength so that he can keep fighting and keep being great until he ultimately has to die. So Hector, with his newfound armor, he goes back into battle, and Ares in fact sits like inside him so that he's got this like great battle rage in there. So he goes inside Hector, and then both of them in one body go onto the battlefield and they start fighting and all of this, and then the Trojans are all like, we need to go and get the body of Patroclus, so let's just go and attack, which Homer is then like, these fools, because Ajax is obviously ready to kill the lot of them, which he does successfully. Not obviously the main characters are fine, but all of these like minor Trojans, Ajax is just like, no, go away. As Ajax is being a total bad man right now, he does look over to Menelaus at one point and he's like, look, I'm actually not worried about this body getting taken away from us right now. I'm also worried about my head and your head being hacked off our bodies by these crazy ass Trojans, because that is clearly what they want. So he does ask Menelaus if Menelaus can run off and go and find some other big Greek names to come and help them guard the body, because he's like, the two of us are doing fine right now, but we can't do it alone. That's ridiculous. Menelaus doesn't actually target anybody specifically. In fact, he just does this like general yell where he's like, hey, can someone help us make sure that Patroclus's body is not dog food by the end of this day? And a bunch of very important Greeks do come forward. So like little Ajax comes forward, Meriones comes forward, and lots of other people like that. They all come forward to guard Patroclus with them. Now there's a massive fight scene that I'm cutting out right now because there's a lot of tug with this body. There's a lot of back and forth with the body. Like, it's just everybody's fighting over Patroclus. Sometimes the Greeks have it, sometimes the Trojans have it. We then do note that there are other parts of the battle that aren't as hectic as this part in the middle, where all of the greatest heroes are in the middle, but all of the other guys are around the other side. Like, we have Antilochus at one point. He's off on the side with his brother, and they don't know that Patroclus is dead at this point, but they're putting up a good fight on their end. Homer notes that he's like, they weren't terrible over there, they just had no clue what was going on. So that is a massive battle scene that if you need that for class or whatever, go and read the text because it's too big. Like, my stickmen will not do that any justice. In fact, we get to this point where the tug of war and this back and forth is so impressive that Athena nor Ares could even like think about getting involved. Like, this is just really good fighting happening, and this is a very important moment for all of them. But because the men are so far away from the Greek camps now, Achilles doesn't know that Patroclus is dead. We need to remember this, that Achilles is sitting still pretty in his tent, and he has no clue that Patroclus has gone against the only order he told him to do. And this is actually what spurs on the Greeks to keep fighting, because they know, they even say at one point, it would be better for them on the battlefield for the ground to open up and take them all, rather than have the Trojans take the body, because Achilles is gonna be mad. He's gonna be mad anyways, regardless, because Patroclus is now dead. That is his lifelong best friend, possibly more based on his reaction, which I'll get into in book 18. But like, it's just, this idea that they could come back without Patroclus is not actually an option. It's either death or Patroclus's body. In fact, this is such a serious moment for all of the Greeks, pretty much. This is a serious tug of war that they're going on. This is a serious battle book, okay? And it's so serious because the death of Patroclus is so important to all of them. It's even important to Achilles' horses, because bear in mind that Automedon is the guy who rode the chariot in that Patroclus was on, so he's still in his chariot, and the horses are crying. Like, they're literally crying as they're there. And Automedon is apparently whipping them, trying to get them to at least move, because he obviously can't fight and ride the horses at the same time. We've explained that there have to be two people in the chariot. So because of that, he's just trying to get them to move, and they won't budge. They're like a monument to Patroclus in this moment. Like, their heads are now on the ground. They're like weeping these like warm tears into the soil. It's so sad. And even Zeus feels bad about this, because Zeus then starts saying that he doesn't understand why they would give these horses to Achilles in the first place, because men are gonna die. That's the only certainty. He's like, these men are gonna die. Patroclus has just died. Achilles will die. And yet these horses are immortal. He's like, why would we give them to these mortals? What were we thinking? He feels so bad that he ends up putting these strength into the horses' legs so that at least they'll start moving. And in fact, when they do start moving, that Automedon, then he obviously wants to get into fighting, but he can't. As I just said, he can't do both. So he ends up seeing Alcimedon on the field. These two names that are very similar. So he is the Alcimedon, not Automedon. Alcimedon is the leader of the 5th battalion, from when I mentioned it in the last episode of the Myrmidons. He's that guy, and he sees Automedon on the field, and he calls out to him. He's like, who gave you this fantastic idea to stay out on the battlefield when the guy who was your warrior, the guy who was your soldier, is now freaking dead? You are useless and you are about to die yourself, probably. Which Automedon, in response to him, does say like, well, actually, because of the immortal horses, I can't just have anybody jump in here. However, you know how to ride these horses. The only other people who can steer these horses aside from me, Patroclus, and Achilles is you. So can you come into the chariot so that I can have a chance to get out onto the battlefield and fight? And so the other guy is like, okay, fine. And he does hop into the chariot so that finally the charioteer can have a chance to get out onto the battlefield. Now, Aeneas and Hector see this happening, and Hector has his eye on Achilles' horses, which once again, that's a stupid thing to do. We'll explain that again in a hot second. But either way, he has the eye on the horses, and he's like, I want those horses. And he tells Aeneas, like, look at them, these two weak-ass people over there who are by the chariot. We can totally kill them and get the horses. Let's get in there. So Aeneas and Hector start striding in with these two other guys to fight off Alcimedon and Automedon, right? And so when Automedon sees them approaching, he even says to him in the chariot, he's like, keep this chariot close to me because I don't see this going well, so I might need to hop in and escape. In fact, these other two guys that came on the Trojan side, Homer notes that these two had like super high hopes of killing these guys, except Homer's like, yeah, no, those two are definitely not going to return from this encounter, so don't even try. And you're reading it just like, I literally don't even need to know these guys' names. Like, I really, there's no point. If they're about to die, Homer just told us, just completely ignore them. So Automedon now meets up with these guys on the battlefield, and he ends up throwing a spear at one of the irrelevant dudes and just kills him like straight up on the spot, hits him in the belly, he dies. So then Hector fires a spear at him, he then ends up dodging it. Obviously, like, all of the Greeks are really good at dodging spears, so he dodges the spear, and then it's like they would have gotten into this huge battle basically with both of the Ajaxes come in and they just like help him, and so then Automedon gets a chance to strip that guy who he killed his armor and give it to Alcimedon to then bring back to the Greek camps. That's really the only important thing that happens from this little altercation. I just describe it because like it's a little time for Automedon, so like why not include that since we're here. He also gets back into the chariot and he goes back that way as well. But either way, we're gonna cut back to Patroclus because that's way more important. So back at Patroclus's body though, Athena is sent down to go and help the Greeks, because even though Zeus still kind of has to help the Trojans push back so that Achilles can come out, he's now in favor of the Greeks, really. For like the end of the book, he's really on the Greek side. So she's sent sent down, and that's how we know that now he's sort of given up a little bit, because he's like, Athena, you can go and help the Greeks. So she goes in there, and she takes on the guys of Phoenix, who we've met a bunch of times before, right? So she takes on his guys, and she goes down to the Greeks. So she goes to find Menelaus, and she's like, hey, you still have to encourage all the Greeks. Remember, her voice is like Phoenix's, so he doesn't know it's Athena. And so she's like, go and encourage all the Greeks to keep fighting, like we have to keep going. And Menelaus turns around, he's super melodramatic, and he's just like, I can't do it by myself, and I wish that Athena was here to help me, because I'm so sad by the death of Patroclus. Which obviously Athena loves, okay? Athena loves that, like, someone needs her, and so she's like, okay, great, Menelaus. She puts all this strength into him, and he ends up firing his spear at this random Trojan dude and killing him and taking that body away. So Menelaus is a bit like, okay, cool, I'm not like all that useful anymore. And Athena's like, yes, boo, keep doing you. Seeing this, Apollo wants to stir more on the Trojan side, right? So then he goes down, he takes on the form of this other guy, and he goes down to talk to Hector, and he's like, hey, you just like shied away from Menelaus in battle, even though he just killed one of your friends. Like, what the hell was that about? And obviously Hector is like super mad by this, and he's like, oh, I didn't even see that. Now I'm really mad, and I have to go and kill Menelaus. Because that's how the men are in this book, when you're just like, I feel like you could all just take a seat. I feel like you must all be really tired and sleep deprived, and that probably isn't helping your anger problem, but either way. He's sort of stirred on by Apollo. Apollo leaves, and Zeus lets out this like massive lightning clap thing. Lightning clap, it's thunderclap and lightning bolts, there we go. So he like lets down this lightning bolt, which does kind of symbolize to all of them that like he's still on the Trojan side, and that like the Trojans are gonna start pushing forward. And even the Greeks notice this, and Ajax in particular is like, for sake. There's actually another fighting scene right here, which I'm not going to explain as well because we'll be here all day, that actually Meriones gets hit by a spear in this moment. He's not dead, it's fine. It was just totally like an accident. Meriones is like, oh my god, what the hell? I mean, it was supposed to hit Idomeneus, it's a whole thing, but either way, we're gonna cut to Ajax because Ajax sees the lightning bolt, and he's obviously not thrilled by this, but he's still standing over Patroclus's body. So Ajax turns to Menelaus, and he's like, it is so obvious that Zeus is on the Trojan side, because now whenever they fire like a spear or an arrow at us, it hits one of the Greeks. And he's like, that's not fair. That's clearly a god. The Trojans aren't that good. So now we're kind of screwed. Like, now that Zeus is not on our side, what the hell are we supposed to do out here? He stresses in this moment that they really have to come up with a game plan, like right now. Because he's like, the god's not on our side. We have to get his body back. But someone in the meantime has to go and tell Achilles what's happened. Because once again, Achilles doesn't know that Patroclus is dead, and this is the most important thing. So Ajax is like, okay, here's my great idea. Why don't you go and find Antilochus, because Antilochus will be the best person to talk to Achilles. So you go find Antilochus, tell him to go and run back to Achilles, and we'll sort everything out whilst he's doing that. So Menelaus is okay. He then runs to go and find Antilochus on the other side of the battlefield, fills Antilochus in on everything. Antilochus listens for like a really long time, and he's like super silent, and then he just starts crying because he's like, but he's like, okay. So he hands over his like armor, not all of his armor, like his weapons, basically. Hands over his weapons to this other guy that he's fighting with, and then he starts booking it back to the camps because he has to be the bearer of bad news. When Antilochus leaves, Menelaus then goes back to Patroclus's body to help guard it, and he tells Ajax, I did what you said, I sent Antilochus back, so now we have to figure out a plan of action. And it's now that big Ajax suggests that actually him and Meriones, I just said that Meriones got hit, but like I said, it wasn't bad, so he's still okay in battle. So he then comes over, and Ajax is like, you two, Menelaus and Meriones, why don't you pick up Patroclus and put him on your shoulders and walk him out of here, and me and the other Ajax will fight everybody off. So that is their great plan, and they're like, okay, cool, fine. So Menelaus, Meriones pick up the body of Patroclus, put him on the shoulders, and they start to walk out, and they're like surrounded by a lot of the Greeks. But in particular, both little and big Ajax are on either side. Now, the Trojans see this happening, and they just start pounding at them. Like, it is a force to be reckoned with. But every single time they approach, all the Greeks, but most importantly the Ajaxes, are there to literally stab all of them. Every single one of them. They're like, absolutely not. Hector and Aeneas in particular are hot on their heels. They're hot on the body of Patroclus's heels, and they keep running at them. But the rest of the Trojans let out this like massive wartime scream, and that is really how we end the book, with the body of Patroclus being carried back. We have Antilochus, who's ahead of the body, going to tell Achilles what's happening before the body comes there, and on the other end of the body we have all the Trojans that are running to try and get it, right? That's the focus of the battle at the moment, and that is how the book ends. Woo! We finally got to the end of book 17. If you guys weren't wearing black, please be aware that for next time I will still be wearing black, because it is still a very sad episode. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll be seeing you next time with more videos. We'll be seeing you next time with book 18 here on Moaning. We'll see you guys then.